You
user forum
yourself, yeah,
2023.
that's it. Great.
My name is Jörg Freudenstein from Germany. I'm working quite a couple of years in the standardization and maintenance of DATEX 2, and I'm also active with regards to the German National Access Point, which is the Mobilität. In this particular session, I will introduce you the DATEX 2 profiling. That means we will discuss what is a profile and especially how to create a profile. Thus, we have technical aspects in this session, but also very practical ones, because I'm going into the schema generation wizard and we create a profile just here online, so to say. Okay, let's start. What is a profile? I want to start with a image of a pile of building bricks. People with children will recognize this. And we have a lot of elements here in different colors, in different flavors. We can build a lot of models out of this. It covers really everything you need to build something. When you compare this to DATEX 2, we talk of a DATEX 2 ontology, which has got a lot of elements to express everything you like. But of course, DATEX 2 should be a little bit more ordered and structured. Maybe it's more looking like this here. But at the end, you want to create something. You want to create an interface in the case of DATEX 2, or here in this case of the building bricks, you want to create some model. Maybe this could be a little helicopter. And what you need to do is you need to sort out the elements which you need for this helicopter. You need some little instruction, which you can see here, and you need the particular tiles to build this helicopter. Maybe you can have different options of the helicopter. Maybe you can have a different color of the rotor. But at the end, it's a small helicopter, and everyone knows the outcome is a small helicopter. Maybe you are also interested in building a big helicopter, maybe more like this. But in the sense of DATEX, that would be a different profile, because here other tiles are necessary, other modules are used. Let me repeat the question. What is a profile? Here we are talking about XML schema, but that's not necessarily the case. We can also talk about JSON, for example. What I already mentioned is that this DATEX 2 level A is very complex and comprehensive. Level A is the term for the DATEX module, which is standardized and which is available on the website, which means this one is harmonized across Europe and standardized in the CEN standards and European norm of DATEX. And what we want to do now is we want to build interfaces, and they usually only need a small subset of it. They are relevant for only specific messages and not all of the messages. Maybe there are optional elements which are not needed in our profile, and some enumeration values we can skip because there are too much of them and they are not all necessary for the purpose we are talking about. So why do we do all this? Well, the aspect is the cost of the software. And if anyone is implementing software or even has some company doing that, he probably knows that the cost of software often depends on the number of classes, or at least on the amount of software to be implemented. And this should be minimized, of course, to reduce these costs. And that's why we are going to create these profiles. Well, it's useful to implement only these elements which are really necessary and not all the other stuff which will never be used in your interface. And to do that, we need a tailored XML schema, a tailored XSD file, which supports exactly this. And in the context of DATEX, we call that a DATEX 2 profile, the outcome. Well, let me repeat the question a third time. What is a profile? You can say something like this. A DATEX 2 profile is a selected subset of the DATEX 2 level A model, usually for a specific interface or use case. But when talking about level A, You might have heard about level B, which are extensions. You can extend DATEX on your own style for things which are not yet in the level A standard, for project-specific things or for future features. And those are called level B extensions. And of course, a profile can also cover those level B extensions. And just to be complete, there is even a third level, level C. These are models which are using the DATEX methodology, but which are using a different set of data, maybe even another scope of data. They are called level C. And also level C models usually are a profile. In DATEX, we have the aspect of the backwards compatibility. That means in the terms of extensions that you can make extensions, and if a client doesn't know this extension, he will not crash, but he will have by construction a mechanism that he can accept that there is some extension which is not known to him. And in the terms of profiles, it means when you have got some client which is capable of the complete DATEX level A model, it will always be capable of your specific profile, because the profile is a subset of the level A model. And again, by construction, that means it will be compatible. Now let's have a look on some examples for profiles. I denoted some here, for example, roadworks, measured values, parking, electronic traffic regulations, and many more, of course, you can think of. All parts of data can be, of course, subject for profiles. But you might realize some of them here are also namespaces. For example, parking, electronic traffic regulations, these are namespaces. And you can make a profile for a complete namespace. For example, you can make the parking namespace your profile, but that's not usually not the best idea to comprise a complete namespace for this. Usually it makes more sense to limit the options and to take fewer elements to have a very specific profile. For example, for truck parking, for urban parking, or other specific types of parking, and not having all the stuff from the complete namespace with you, because the idea, of course, is to have slim profiles which are very specific for your needs. Now, what can you do technically by profiling, or how do you profile at the end? There are 4 options you have. The first one is the deselections of complete publications, classes, or elements. The second one is the modification of multiplicity. Then we have the possibility to select different enumeration literals, or especially deselect others. And adding faces is number 4 possibility you have. I will explain all those 4 possibilities now in the next slides. The first one is the selection or deselection of elements. As you can see here on the right, we have some tree-like structure. You will see that later on in the practical part of the session. And you can select or deselect all these elements. And when you do that on the very upper level, you can select complete branches of the tree and use it or don't use it. You can also see that there are some gray elements which are mandatory at the end. When you have the specific branch of the tree included in your selection, then you also have to take the mandatory, the gray elements with you. That happens automatically, and in the end effect, you cannot deselect them here in the tool. There are also some parts that are reused in several parts of the model, and usually you have to decide whether you take those parts with you or if you don't do that, and you cannot differentiate between the different occurrences of parts that are used on different parts of the model. The next one was the modification of the multiplicity. You know, the multiplicity is the lower bound and the upper bound of an element. If it says, for example, 0 to 1, then it is an optional element which can occur 0 times or 1 times. And the options of modification from the level A model you can increase the lower bound, you can decrease the upper bound, but of course they must not be beyond each other's limit. And to make that a little bit more clear, we have examples here. What you can do is you can make an optional element make mandatory. That means from 0 to 1, you change it to 1 to 1, so to say. You can make an unlimited element limited. For example, from 0 to n or 0 to star, you can change it, for example, to 0 to 3. You can narrow the limitation. If you have some limitation in the kind of 1 to 4, you can limit that a little bit, so to say, for 2 to 3 occurrences. And a mandatory element which already has got a multiplicity of 1 to 1 cannot be narrowed down, it stays mandatory. That means in the end effect that in level A it is already mandatory. That means the designers of DATEX had the thought this element is important and must be in every profile, and thus you cannot change anything for mandatory elements. It stays mandatory in this case. Number 3 was the selection of enumeration literals. You might know that DATEX 2 has a couple of enumerations, and sometimes these are quite long lists with a lot of literals. And this makes sense because you always have situations where you need very specific elements, and so these lists got quite long sometimes. But on the other hand, in specific profiles, there might be the interest to only have very few messages and not to support all possibilities which are offered there. For example, here we are talking about accidents. And in DATEX 2, we have a long list of different types of accidents which can occur and which can be described at the end. It is possible that you want to have such a long list, but it is also possible in specific cases that you don't want to have this long list and only focus, for example, on basic accidents and some kind of heavy or serious accidents. And then you can make this list, you can deselect all these elements until you end up with a much smaller list, for example, which of course makes it easier to implement it into the software. Number 4 are facets, and if you don't know this term, maybe you think on these very nice stones here, which are depicted here. But in this case, we are talking not about those kind of faces. Of course, we are talking about technical kind of faces. And that means that you can restrict elements in their scope of value. So for example, with facets, you can limit a certain string to a number of characters or some integer for a specific upper bound, which the value scope of these elements can be defined with facets. Now you heard something what you can do, but you don't know how to do that. And how to do that is the schema generation tool from DATEX. It's a web-based wizard. And this tool enables you to select the desired elements and do all the modifications you heard about. And it automatically generates the resulting schema files. You have the address here, which is an ordinary web address. No registration is necessary. And I will show that in a few minutes. I have another link for you because you can work just with this wizard. That is possible. Everything is in the wizard. But it could be very helpful to have a UML model at hand. Then you have a better visibility where the elements are, which are the elements which you need, and you have better information on the model structure. And also the UML model can be found by an ordinary web address, which you see here. And we will use these two tools now to demonstrate how to create a profile. Okay, now we come to the practical part of our session. And I opened up these two web addresses, which I showed on the previous slides. Here you can see the UML model of DATEX 2. And you can see on the left hand side a structure. And now I'm opening the payload publication. And we'll have a look at the payload publication classes, which you can see here. You can see a lot of classes which are specializations of the payload publication, such as situation, parking, traffic regulation, and many more. But usually you only want to have one of those in your profile. Yeah? For example, we are interested in a situation publication. And you can see a situation publication consists of several situations and several situation records. And we can go deeper in the model for situation records. You have got 4 possible specializations. It can be a generic record. It can be some kind of service information. It can be some kind of traffic element. It can be an operator action. These are the possibilities for a situation record. Maybe in this particular case, we are interested in operator actions. Operator actions can be roadside assistance, network management, or roadworks. Roadworks sounds interesting. And so we have a look at the roadworks class. Roadworks can be construction works or maintenance works. And we keep that in mind for the selection of our profile, that could be an interesting thing we want to have a profile for. Now we change to the other web address, which I denoted. That was the web tool, the schema generation tool, the wizard. And yeah, let's start the wizard working. You can see that it is a stepwise approach. We have got 7 steps until we get our profile. And we start with the model, which we want to take, which we want to work on. And it is possible to configure your own model, to upload your own model to work with. This could be the case when you are working on level B extensions and you do your own model extensions. You develop them with Enterprise Architect, you export them in an XML file, and then you can upload here to work with the model. And this tool has a couple of system checks which are going to check if everything in your model is compatible with the DATEX methodology. In this case, we don't create our own model. We just use a predefined model. And as you can see here, we have different versions which are available. The most current one is right now 3.4, but there are also older versions available. And well, this version consists of situation, road traffic data, VMS, energy infrastructure, facilities, and parking. And in case you would make your profile just as it is without any selection, that would be a couple of stuff included here. Yeah? Different topics, road traffic data, energy, parking. So you would have a very huge profile. Which is not the intention. The intention is to have a very slim, specific profile. Yeah. But situation is included. That looks good. And so we don't need to change anything. We just click on the next button. In the next step, we can choose a selection. Especially we can choose an own selection file. And that is used if you had a previous turn where you already created some selection and then you saved the selection into a file, and then you can recap and reload this file here to get the same selection you had in a previous turn of the wizard. We don't have that right now, so we can go on the first tab and need to change anything again and just click on the next button. Now we are in the profile selection. And you might think that this would be the place where we are doing our profiling, which I described before, but that's not quite correct, because here on this tab, we are talking about recommended reference profiles and recommended service profiles, RRP and RSP. And you can see here in the middle that these profiles are handling the delegated regulations of the European Commission, different delegated regulations, as you can see here. And they provide some kind of minimum profile to fulfill these different delegated regulations. That means a minimum set of elements will be checked when we click on one of these elements here. And then you have the possibility to extend the selection to add more elements which are interesting for you. You also have the possibility to deselect some of the elements, but when they are needed for the regulation, you will get a warning in this case. It means right now we don't use these RRP and RSP profiles. You will hear about them in the next sessions a little bit more. But that's not the kind of profile selection I was talking about today. And so we just leave these elements here unchecked and continue to the next one. The next one is the location. Of course, you might know location is a very important topic in nearly every interface, and nearly every message makes use of at least one location. Usually you are using more than one location. And here you have the possibility to select between 3 different types. Of course, you can also select all 3 types: area, linear, and point. In our case, I would say we are focusing on linear locations. You can expand the tree here, and then you can see that we have different location standards that are implemented in DATEX. And maybe we are not interested any longer in LSC and in TPEG. And linear within linear element is also a little bit specific. So let's use GML line string or OpenLR linear. As these are 2 methods, they are optional. That's why I could deselect it. So you have got the possibility to provide one of those methods or both methods, but at this point of stage, it's not mandatory to use both of them. Okay, then we continue to the next. And now this model is loaded into the system. It was no upload from my computer. It's a procedure on server side, because the model is fixed, provided on server side, and it's loading now, which takes a little bit, a few seconds. And then we can work on this model. As you can see, it's a tree structure, and the roof is the payload publication. And especially here in the upper part of the tree, you can see all the elements which we had in the UML model. I switch back to the UML model and back to the payload publication. And all these classes which are ordered around the payload publication can be found here in the tree, to make a selection. And we talked about the situation publication, which could be interesting. So it is possible to just select the situation publication. And when I unfold the tree for the situation publication, and especially the situation record, for example, you can see that all these elements are checked now, because I checked the upper situation publication. And so we have all the elements of the situation publication in our profile now, especially all traffic elements, all service information, all kind of road operator actions, etc. That's not what we wanted, because we wanted a very slim profile only for roadworks, and that's much too much here in this case. And so I uncheck situation publication again. All these checks are removed now, and I'm going down in this tree into the operator action and into the roadwork section. And there I can see, okay, roadworks is divided into the construction works or maintenance works. And maybe I'm just interested in construction works. So I just click on the construction works element. And now you can see that only the mandatory elements are checked. We have one enumeration type for the type of the construction work. This is mandatory. Then we have the roadworks, the operator action. Here in the upper part, we have location reference and validity, which are mandatory elements. And you can see much of the elements are not checked, and we have a very slim and tight profile only to describe some kind of construction works. Now we can go on this construction work type and use the right mouse because we have some more options, some more attribute options in this case. And you can see this element has a multiplicity 1 to 1. That means when you use construction works, then the construction work type is mandatory to use because it's the only element inside this class. That means we cannot change it, as I explained before. An element which is mandatory in DATEX level R cannot be changed in a customized profile. But what we can do is we can go on the data type tab and see the literals inside. There are 5 literals available for construction work, and well, we can check or uncheck them. Maybe we are not interested in blasting work or demolition work, but all the others are fine: construction work, road improvement, road widening, and we can save these changes. We will have later a look in the resulting XML if that can be found there. Maybe we also want another element, action plan identifier, which is right now not included in our profile, but maybe we want to have it. So we make a checkbox here. It's an optional element, of course, otherwise it couldn't be unchecked. And again, we go onto the attribute options, and here we can see it is an optional element 0 to 1. And maybe we want to change that. We want to change this optional to mandatory, so we make a 1 to 1. And we save these changes. That means whenever our profile is implemented by an XML instance, this XML instance must provide an action plan identifier. Otherwise, it would not validate against our profile. And you remember we had another option to add faces. Once again, I go into the same element action plan identifier. Again, I use the right mouse. You can see our modification, which we did. Yeah, and I want to add a facet here in the facet line. For this purpose, we need to have a specific syntax. You have to know this, or you have to get information how to input the syntax here. In this case, it's XS max length value should be 10. That means we limit the characters of this element to 10 characters. And we save these changes again. Now we have a quite slim profile with only very few possibilities to describe construction works. And yeah, that's what we wanted to have. And we click on the next button. On this tab, we can select the output. In this case, it's XML schema, but we can also use JSON or ASL1 in an experimental state. But right now we are focusing on XML schema as an output. We can also say that the schema should have definitions. That means an English definition term is attached to every element, to every class, to every element, to every literal. And that makes it yeah, more useful for developers and implementers, of course. The next option would be the selection configuration file. I told before that there is a possibility to save your selection and to recap in the next turn of the wizard. If you want to do that, you should click this option that it is saved locally, and then you can reuse your profile for easy modifying it later on. Right now, we don't need to do that. And actually we finished here our wizard, and we can click on the next button again. And now the schema is generated. At a first glance, we have a log file here. You see that a couple of debug and system information, a couple of checks have been taken place. Of course, there should not occur any warning or error, but as we used an internal model, it is very unlikely that any error should occur. Error or warnings might occur if you use your own model and you did something wrong and did not respect DATEX methodology at the one or other stage. Okay, the log file is fine, and you saw that there was a download. I have to recap this download. Here it is. And this download has got it's a zip file with 5 files in it. And what you can see is that you have the log file included, and that you have 4 schema files. You have the D2 payload, the common, and the location referencing. These are the very basic schema files which you have in nearly all of your profiles, because the elements are of such a basic kind that they are always usually included. It doesn't make too much sense not to have one of those elements included. And the next one is the situation XSD. Of course, this namespace is included because we worked in the situation record element because we used the roadworks. If we would have made a profile out of parking, then the parking XSD would appear here, for example. We can have a look into these files, for example, in the payload file. I can make it as a text. You can see that the file is quite short, and payload is only some kind of wrapper which only imports the other files. You can see here situation, location referencing, and common. All these files are imported in the D2 payload schema file. So the more interesting file would be the situation XSD. You can see that this file is also quite short. It has got 170 lines, which is not much for a situation schema file. And well, here you can see that there's definitions of different complex and simple types. And we can have a look maybe on the construction work type enum. That was the one we modified. You can see it is defined here in the middle of the page. And you can see the literals of these enumeration are construction work, road improvement, and road widening. Exactly those 3 elements which we checked. And especially those 2 elements which we unchecked are not included. That was demolition and blasting works or something like that. They are not included in this list, so everything fine, worked as expected. We can also have a look at the identifier, the roadworks identifier. We also modified this element, as you remember. We made it mandatory, which you can see here. Min occurs 1, max occurs also 1. The first one, this one, would have been 0 if we didn't did a modification. But as we modified it to a mandatory, this one is 1 here. And as already explained, whenever a client tries to make an instance without this roadworks identifier, then a validation error would occur because this option here is not fulfilled. And what you can see also is that we have a restriction on the string length. It says max length value 10. That was what we added into the phases. And now it's represented here in this schema. And that also means whenever a client has an XML file where this element has got maybe 12 characters, then a validation error will occur. So everything fine, everything as expected. You have a quite nice slim profile which you can give to your developers and which can create classes out of it. And yeah, that's what we expected and that's what we wanted to have. So for now, I'm at the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed. And of course, you can ask questions. You can do that via the chat function. We have some more minutes for answering them. So feel free to